From University of Maryland University College, this is Thursday Thoughts with Dr. Alan Drimmer. This series features faculty and friends of UMUC highlighting areas of academic expertise.
Welcome to Thursday Thoughts at the University of Maryland University College. Today I'm joined by my friend and colleague Peter Smith, who's written a fantastic new book called Pre-Range Learning in the Digital Age. And we'd like to talk about the book. Before we get into it, though, I'd note that we're live on Facebook, and anyone that has comments can just post them on the site, and they'll get to us. I really enjoyed reading the book. It was a lot of fun to read, and I laughed, I cried, I had a great time. It's full of very engaging student stories, but there are also a number of very important themes that run through it. And I have to say, in my 20 years in higher education, I don't think I've seen a book quite like it. It's part owner's manual for adults who are interested in going back to school, and part a cookbook for presidents and administrators and investors who want to make a better school.
Yes.
Tell us about why you wrote the book.
Well, I've been living in this world of adult learners since 1971, when I was lucky enough to be what became the founding president of the Community College of Vermont. And I've always been engaged with experiential learning and the assessment of prior experiential learning as a value for learners. I realized the last book I wrote was called Harnessing America's Wasted Talent, a New Ecology of Learning, and it was projecting where I thought we were going to go, and I wrote it about 8 or 9 years ago. And what happens with me is things sort of percolate, and about 2.5 years ago, I began to think this environment, this new ecosystem is beginning to reveal itself. It's still, my metaphor, it's a little bit like skiing in a blizzard without goggles, because there's so much coming at you. But there's a lot out there, and I thought it might be time to try to understand what this new ecosystem was beginning to look like. But then as I got into it, doing the interviews for the book, Alan, really changed my view of what the book could be. And you're right, it is for multiple audiences. But instead of writing a policy book from on high, where we would preach to people about what they ought to be doing, I thought it would be much more useful to the policy makers and the practitioners to look at the whole thing through the eyes of learners, the people who have been left behind, the people who have paid a price because they weren't in the right place in the right time, or they weren't rich enough, or they were of the wrong color, whatever it might be. And so, that led me, as I heard those stories, I began to be more and more persuaded about the richness of the opportunities that this new environment, this new ecosystem provides for learners. And that led me then to talk to some really innovative presidents and some of the entrepreneurs, so that essentially what the reader is getting from depends on their perspective, their point of entry, but they're getting a street level view, a story from each of those people about what it's like and what's important and why they're doing what they're doing. And to me, as a starting point for policy and practice, that's a better place to start, especially when you're dealing with something that's changing as fast as this environment is.
I think that's remarkable. I can't remember seeing a book like that. And we'll talk more about the book in a minute, but I also thought it would be useful, before we dive into the book more, to get a sense of the context for this. I know, because we're friends, I know you've been a congressman, you've been a lieutenant governor, you've had, roles in a lot of places. I first met you in the context of education, where you seem, fairly rooted. Could you talk for a minute just about your own personal trajectory, which you discuss in the book too, but moving back and forth between politics and education, and how you put those two things together?
Well, let's say that I've been much more successful at the politics of education than I was the politics of politics. It was always in me to run for office. What I after I left the Congress, which is what you say when you lose, I had to take stock, and that's one of the stories I tell in the book. It was very painful, but I had to admit to myself, if I bat .567 in baseball, I go to the Hall of Fame. But if you bat .567 in politics and winning elections, you got to find a new job. In other words, I liked it, or the idea of it, more than it liked me. I think I was good at it. I'm proud of the work I did. But it was at that point in time, and it took a little while for me to really grasp this, but to the extent we are put on this earth to do things, I was put on this earth, I deeply believe, professionally, to do education and not politics. And so what I then was able to do, and I used to joke, say I'm a man with a great future behind him, because I've had marvelous opportunities. But after I left the Congress, it opened up a whole new, now almost 30-year chapter in my professional life, in which the values that I brought forward from before politics were able to be fleshed out. And I've written now 3 books, had the benefit of 2 or 3 phenomenal jobs, and with wonderful people. But it was one of those things that I always believed I was going to do, was run for office. And I got it out of my system over a 12-year period, and proud of it, but really thank the good Lord Harry that I was able to recognize the opportunity that leaving the Congress gave back to me, which was to really go deep in adult learning and lifelong learning and the things I care so much about.
Yeah, that's something that's very important to me too. And one of the things when I talk to people who are in this field, I just like to ask them about was there anyone in education, a teacher or somebody else who inspired you? People come to education from all kinds of different places, but in your case, was there a teacher somewhere along the lines who inspired you?
There are really, it all depends which part of my life. The answer is yes. I have been incredibly fortunate to have wonderful people be willing to tell me things I might not have wanted to hear at important times in my life. I think the most, in terms of my formal education, I had a professor at university, and at Princeton they have a thing called preceptorials, where there's 5 or 6 or 8 of you. There's no place to run, no place to hide, and you better know what you're doing. And I was a little bit of a wise ass, and I was a sophomore, and this guy, his name's David Flaherty, threw me out. He said, he threw me out of class. I was not prepared, and he said, I want you to wait. And he came out afterwards, and everybody's going by me, head down, oh God, we got to get out of here. And he comes up to me, he grabs me by the shirt, puts me up against the wall and says, don't you ever waste my time again. You're smart, you can do very well, don't waste my time. You prepare. And turned around and walked off. What? Don't waste my time? I mean, I thought he was going to give me hell. Well, he did. But what he did was say, I've got something to share with you. I think it's valuable. You're here. Be better than you were today. I've obviously never forgotten it. I think from an educational point of view, the 2 people who influenced me the most were my first 2 years out of college, before I started the Community College of Vermont, which happened very early in my life. A fellow by the name of Harvey Scribner was Commissioner of Education in Vermont, and he was very much an advocate of open learning, the Leicestershire school models, and it was more philosophically based those days. We know a lot more about how to do that stuff now well, but I really sat at his knee for a year. I was an aide to him for a year, and developed a program called Do Unto Others Service Learning Program for high school kids that was implemented in Vermont schools. And the other is a guy named Tim Pitkin, who was really the founding president and for 30 plus years the president of Goddard College. And he was a very progressive educator who was really talking about project-based learning and assessment of prior learning and the value of experiential learning long before anybody else was really thinking seriously about it. So that was 1968, 69, 70. Those two people really, I was looking at community-based learning, community-based schools for dropouts from high school. How do you develop different ways to keep people engaged when school, the way we set it up, isn't working? And so I was working on those kinds of things, and both Dr. Scribner Harvey and Tim Pitkin were these eminence grise in my life at that early stage that really helped me set a course that I'm not sure I would have set otherwise.
Thank you for sharing that. You learn a lot about people by asking them that question. And we should probably point out that your mentor at Princeton, who pinned you against the wall, to the viewers, that's not something that we endorse. And unless you want to end up on the front page of the Chronicle, that's probably not a wise thing to do. But really inspiring that you had. A lot of people don't have any. Really,
right.
Many people I've talked to. So let's talk about the book for a minute. Not for a minute, for a while, because it's a substantial book. One of the things I took away from the book was that it has this populist tone to it. It's almost as if you are kind of representing the silent majority or a group of people that isn't able to come together and articulate their feelings and directions. Did you have that sort of in mind to create this kind of populist
I hadn't
approach?
thought about it as a populist tone, but absolutely. When you think about the level, the depth of how much experiential learning is ignored in the way we structure existing college curricula, let alone what happens outside of school, and that people, the reason I wrote that chapter called The Scarecrows Dilemma, is that the scarecrow didn't know what he didn't know, but what he was being, he had a sense he needed something, but there was no indication in his world, and there's no indication in many adults' world as to what they have a right to. And I think
by the way, I
have
love that part in the book about this. Maybe you should just explain for people that haven't seen the book yet. Explain it. I went back. I looked at the dialogue. Well, you have the dialogue there, but I looked at the bigger picture. But talk about this.
Well, the Scarecrows Dilemma, and I'm going to paraphrase here, but in the movie, if you remember,
The Wizard of Oz.
The Wizard of Oz, and he is saying to Dorothy and ultimately the wizard, "I need a brain." So you have the lion who needs a heart, except he's very brave, and you have the scarecrow and the Tin Man. I mean, all of these things, they're exactly the opposite of what they say they are. And the scarecrow saying, I need a brain. And the wizard says, you don't need a brain, you've got one of those, and it's all very artfully done. What you need is a degree. And by honor invested in me, I give you the degree of E pluribus unum, the doctor of thinkology. And then the scarecrow, if you remember the movie, starts dancing around saying, reciting the Pythagorean theorem and saying, "Oh, joy, oh, rapture, I have a brain, I have a brain, but what he really got was a degree." And to me, the dilemma was that he had all that in him, but he didn't know how to get at it or use it until somebody told him he was okay. And to me, and of course at UMUC, in this community, we're dealing with adults all the time, but the power of what happens, and we see it again and again in the interviews, when somebody is reminded of the learning they've done and the power of that learning, it changes them. And I think actually understanding your experiential learning or the value of learning you've done outside of college, could be formal or informally done, but the power of learning how to reflect about that changes people. And I think of that kind of assessment as being a pedagogy in and of its own right. That it, as I help you understand your learning wherever you did it more deeply, and more comprehensively, I am in fact deepening your knowledge and your ability to use that learning.
And it brings a dignity and a respect also to the adult student that I think they deserve. One chapter in the book relates accounts from university presidents, access-oriented institutions or presidents who were talking about their experience. And one of the things that surprised me is I think you asked each one of them the things that were most important in developing a university that had a kind of an open outreach to working adults. And across the several interviews, the two themes that stuck out to me were they were saying that the keys to great university for adults is great student advising and personalization. And I was struck that, well, and those I can certainly understand that, but I was very struck that they didn't ask about they didn't mention academic things. They didn't say academic quality, they didn't say great faculty, they didn't say research. They said academic advising and personalization. And I just wonder if that surprised you and any reflections you have on that.
What surprised me is how consistent they were, because they have very different models, and they were very consistent, and it was advising and support. My takeaway from that, what I inferred, and I know all these people pretty well, is it isn't that the content is not important, or the project-based assessments, or however you choose to do that. That is necessary, but it's not sufficient. And what they were talking about is, what does it take to hold on to busy adults who have been kept away, sometimes against their wishes, or for whom this is a really scary journey? What does it take to hold on to them and get them through to the goals that they have for themselves? And so the content and all the things we do academically have to keep changing because we're in a dynamic world, and the capacity to do things better and better is all around us. And if we don't get a ride on that train, it's going to leave the station without us. That's just a reality of continuous improvement here and every place else. But what goes on is I hate to sound this way, but the user experience. And when you shop at Nordstrom's, you expect something. And the user experience, the ducks, the things happening here, and a lot of the things you're thinking about with the faculty, it's the user experience has to be friendly and supportive in order for people to benefit from the quality of the curriculum and the quality of the teaching and learning. So it's just it is not an extension of a campus, and people here know that very well. It is an entirely different kind of operation. And so when they're saying personalization and personal support and academic advising and all of that stuff, that's where the stickiness is that keeps people engaged. It isn't instead of great content and great teaching and high standards. Those things are absolutely necessary, and that's what accreditation is about. But that alone, you're still going to lose students who otherwise could benefit. What you've got to do is give them a learning environment and a support environment that is respectful and personal.
Right. I do understand that. But that is very important for adult students in particular. By the way, your reference to ducks, just so people know, is a digital user experience.
Sorry.
We don't have ducks in here, although we do believe in wildlife and other forms of things, but that's what it is. Something else you have in the book that's, you have this quote that there's 60 million Americans that have some college and no degree. And I just think that's an astounding number. And I guess I don't get the sense from the newspaper and casual conversations that we have that there's that many people. But why do you think there's not more awareness of this? It's really a completion problem in this country.
They're invisible, and also our mythology, while lionizing and valuing these things. School of Hard Knocks, Live and Learn, the Horatio Alger story, Older but Wiser. I mean, we have all this sort of folklore that says personal learning and personal experience is important, but in fact, there is no way for that to be recognized in the larger society, or there has not been. And so you have, when colleges ignore it, and I call that learning discrimination, We can talk about that if you want to. And when employers ignore it, there's simply no place for any individual, let alone large groups of people. And that's where what you call the populist tone comes from. I have evolved from seeing what I wrote about as a good thing for colleges to do to now saying, when we waste America's talent by ignoring it, we are wasting America's treasure, which is the lives of people and the ability of people. Who pays? Employers pay because they don't get the workforce they need. The individual pays because they get trapped as a prisoner in their own life experience. The society pays. The tax base is less. I mean, and if you want a place that's going to be civically and socially and economically more vital, then you've got to stop wasting this treasure, which is talent walking around that is unrecognized. And I understand there are limits to that. And I understand that all learning people do is in college level. I know all of that. But when you hear an employer say, look, I can send them to a boot camp to learn coding. I need people who know how to get along with each other, think critically, write, solve problems, understand diversity, know how to work on a team. That's the stuff. Well, wait a minute. Those are traits that can be, sort of pulled, can be asked of people to demonstrate. They are traits that people develop all the time, and they can be recognized, along with real content, knowledge, skills, and abilities. So I think there's a real opportunity here. But I've come to see it not as just something cool that we can do for an occasional adult, but I think it, from a national policy perspective, allowing all this talent to go to waste, to be ignored, is a huge national problem that's hurting our country.
I mean, just hearing you talk, one of the things that you bring to this is a kind of urgency about this topic. And as I was thinking about it, I was thinking, well, this is not a new problem. In fact, it's probably been worse. 60 million Americans that have some college but no degree. In the past, at least as a percentage of population, there are probably more people that didn't have any college.
That's right.
But is there anything about right now, the times we're living in right now, that presents a special opportunity to address that? Certainly you feel a lot of urgency, but why now? Special
opportunity and a special dangerous consequence of not seizing the opportunity. We have never had the technological capacity to do the kinds of assessment, whether it's tests or portfolios or whatever, that would create college equivalency and employment validity. We've never had the ability to do that at scale until the technological revolution of literally the last 8 to 10 years. So we have capacity now that allows us to do something. When we started doing this at the Community College of Vermont in 1972, we were literally carrying around boxes, cartons of paper for each person. And a lot of people don't even remember this, but in 1972, we'd only had Xerox copying machines for about 5 years.
What were the documents? What kind of things?
Well, resumes and job evaluations and essays that people had written, and we had to make. It was awful. Now, the danger is that the same media that allows us to do this, taken in another form, will show people who have been shut out of the game through no fault of their own. And I think of colleges now, the traditional college, is a cultural statement. It is a way of organizing something in an information-poor world to create an information-rich place where people could go. But it was also, in its hierarchy and every other way, a cultural statement. If you don't happen to share that culture, it's a pretty hostile place, no matter what. Now, look at all the great things colleges have done. In the late 30s, it was something like 2% of the American population had a baccalaureate degree. Now, that was 80 years ago, and now it's 44% or something. I mean, and so that's good. I mean, there's a lot of good stuff that's happened. The question, though, if I get caught in my life and can't do the 18 to 22-year-old thing, and I see that I'm limited economically. I'm limited in terms of my career path, and I'm beginning to see other people who are getting those opportunities. You have the sort of the potential for people to get really quite angry about the opportunity script they got to play through, and the opportunity script that other people got to play through that was better. So to me, I think there is an opportunity, huge opportunity, but also there's a downside to not seizing that opportunity in terms of social unrest.
Yeah, you're tapping into a kind of set of emotions and urgency that I think is I haven't really heard before. And you're a very strong advocate for adults. So One of the things, you use the term knowledge discrimination, I think. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things you make a strong case for is that adults have all this knowledge and they haven't been successful at translating it into any kind of credential.
Right.
When I think about the things that adults know, I guess I wonder how much of it is relevant. I mean, adults know, how to handle a conflict at work, or how to deal with a difficult family member, or, when somebody gives you a free puppy, it's not really free. There's all these things that we learn as adults that, maybe an 18 or a 19-year-old doesn't know. But it also seems to me that a lot of that stuff is not really academically relevant. So how do you determine what part of the adult experience is and should be relevant?
The first thing you have to do as an academic or as an employer is be very clear about what it is you're looking for. Because we aren't. I mean, historically, we've relied on the college baccalaureate or master's or associate degree being you're good enough in the eyes of a collection of professors who, more often than not, don't talk to each other. And so the standards you're being held to are often implicit, not explicit, and how people get rewarded as they pass through that system can be very, very arbitrary. And so, to me, the first thing is that employers need to know what they're looking for in terms of content, skills, the ability to apply knowledge, and then cross-cutting behavioral and other things. And again, we couldn't do that in a consistent way even 10, 15 years ago. Today, using ONET and all sorts of other things, we can do a lot of analysis, and I think you're beginning to see some employment people doing that. So to me, it's what happens is it gets really interesting. I remember a woman many years ago who went through the assessment program at the Community College of Vermont, and she had raised 3 children. Well, she had run a whole bunch of books about child development, and she was able to cash some of that in because she was able to demonstrate that she knew what to do. But also, as a mom, she had managed conflicting schedules and shopping and going to work. So she had all sorts of management skills that she had never even thought about, that at an associate degree level, in that case, we were able to assign some value to. Mm-hmm. So it isn't all college level, but it can be, and for instance, when you have veterans coming back or members of the armed services, and we always think of them as they've all got guns and they're going around shooting guns. Well, that's about 10%. The other 90%, as we know here, because we deal with them, right, it's supply chain management, it's health, it's all these things they have been doing and learning about doing. Right. And then we set up Dante's, we set up all these servicemen's opportunity college, and frankly, way too many institutions ignore all that.
Well, that's the next place I wanted to go, because why do you think that more institutions aren't focusing on that? You point out in the book there are some, mm-hmm, but why don't other institutions feel the urgency that you do about this?
Well, I think it goes to the heart of disruptive theory. And I don't know how many folks listening in are, know in any detail about Clayton Christensen's theory of disruption. But the fact of the matter is that The traditional university was designed as an oasis of knowledge in an information-poor desert, the community around it. And with the exception of libraries, there really wasn't much else. And Benjamin Franklin called the library the University of the Common Man. But not a whole lot of people went in and used libraries that way. What's happened is that the desert has gone green. And so you have these institutions that are surrounded now by knowledge and applications and information and practices that are counter to the way and the assumptions and the way universities were initially organized, which was for a reason. Okay, and but the reasons are changing, and so you have people, really good people, organized to do business a certain way, and all of a sudden it begins to look expensive and time-consuming. And I still think if you're an 18-year-old and you can go to college, by God, go. Just don't think that's the last chapter. That's the first chapter. You're going to have to keep learning throughout your life. So this isn't a knock on colleges at that level, but it is simply that they are under tremendous pressure, and for the first time in recorded history that I'm aware of, they don't control the sources of the pressure. So a place like Degreed or Credley or Portfolium or Straighterline, the groups I write about in the book, they're going to do their thing no matter what. And you know, the question is, what's the impact on colleges with the decline in 18-year-olds? And we know how many 18-year-olds are going to be in 2036 right now, because they all got born last year. So it's not a mystery. But you know, if higher education collectively misses this boat, stands still, I think it's going to have really negative consequences. Now, I don't think they are standing still at all. But I do think there's a long way to go for the traditional mindset of I control the content and I decide how much learning is enough, when in fact there can be external standards with examples, project-based approaches, and ways to, I mean, if you want someone to appreciate history, one of the things we did at Cal State Monterey Bay, we asked students to go out and research their own family's history. Come back and tell us what the last 50 years have been like in their family, thinking about politics, religion, the economy. And then that's history, right? It may not be in all the textbooks. So now let's go and do some history. And it really sort of enriched their understanding of that history is real and alive. It's real people. It's not just coming off the page.
Yeah, and authentic and relevant to them. Yeah.
So
yeah, you mentioned Credley and Degreed, and those are non-credit. Well, they could involve credit things, but I wanted to ask you about your perspective on credit and non-credit, because one of my favorite parts of the book was a conversation that you had with a student at the Community College of Vermont. I think Marjorie Hood was her name, and you were proposing non-credit classes to them, and she said, you know, you with your college degrees on the wall are telling us we don't need, you know, degrees, and I just wondered what you take away from that and how you think about the credit versus non-credit. It's still a very live issue today with MOOCs and other things. What's your perspective on credit versus non-credit?
Marjorie was perfect because she changed the direction of the Community College of Vermont. I drove home that night saying, wow, I was thinking of Ivan Illich and learning dashboards, except we didn't use that term back then, and informal learning where the community got together and taught each other things, and, you know, cool. And she said, you know, you're up here. Get down here on the ground where the rest of us have both feet planted. We need this stuff to be validated. And so that's where the assessment of prior learning came from. And from my point of view, you're going to see places like Degreed and Credley connect with employers without colleges, or I hope with colleges that become partners, so that somebody who gets an employment validation could also use the same information to get some academic validation of what they know. It's the same information applied to different kinds of standards for different purposes. But to me, I would always argue that the reasons to not offer college recognition, whether it's credit or competence or completion or whatever, the reasons not to offer it for all these other reasons and in these other settings or in these other circumstances would only be because that learning didn't meet the standards. Having said that, in the free-range world, where I think the great advantage that institutions like ours can have is to organize pathways for people, because it's a confusing world out there, and they need someone who they trust who will give them answers and direction for their life journey, or the next lap of their life journey. So to me, it's up to people to do what they want, and there will be some people, I think less than 10%, who are just free-range learners. They just DIY, go out and do it. But all the data I've seen and the experiences as I've understood them that I've had, there will always be a place, even if the roles change and the responsibilities change, for an institutionally supported pathway. And to me, the rationale for no credit has been reduced from it didn't happen here, which is the old college thing, well, not invented here, forget about it, to it's not college level. That should be the dividing line in my mind.
Yeah, and that's interesting, and I think you've really gone very deep with the adult learner. And one of the things that strikes me about the adult learner is, many institutions refer to them as non-traditional, even though, and other people made this point, that they're 70% of the student population, so how can that be? They're really the traditional ones. But one of the things I was thinking is that, adults with their life experiences, as you described them, really bring a set of questions to college that 18 to 20-year-olds don't. I mean, if you think about it, an 18 to 20-year-old, their experiences are really quite limited. And, ideas are abstract to them. Adults have observations, and they're bringing a lot of things. And in some ways, that experience should be richer. But that's not often how, we feel like it's a liability. And I guess I'm just interested in your reaction to that.
Well, I think when you're making a case for 18 to 22-year-olds is a curriculum that is much more experiential. In other words, that we're asking them to do things, to do service learning, to engage in a project, work on a team, and write collectively a report, where you have to deal with the fact some people aren't going to work as hard as other people. I mean, so I think rather than asking them to be in a traditional academic setting, and I think colleges are doing better and better at this, but really understanding that what they need is experience. So what do they do during the summer? What kind of advice do you give them if they have to hold a job while they're going to school? How can that inform what they're doing? Because you're dead right. What happens with adults is that they come, and once you've assessed and helped them understand, they know they're learners, they know they've learned, and they want to learn more, and they may in fact be a little more conventional in some ways, in the sense of not being quite so starry-eyed as kids, younger people are, but they're very serious, and their sense of purpose is much, much more concrete, I think, in general. So it strikes me that the message and I think colleges are responding to this, but to actively engage younger students in the application of the knowledge you're trying to impart to them is really important. Really important.
Yeah, and I think they do bring the strengths that you're talking about to that experience. Last question I want to ask you about is about the relation of your work to the United States. in many ways, the book that you've written is about themes that are relevant to American principles, about empowerment and rebirth and democratization. And I can't really see this book being written in another country. But just given your experience with government and with this country and its principles, is there something particularly American about this book in your mind?
I think it's peculiarly American right now, in that we come out of our own tradition, and the interaction of technology and opportunity and how it ties into the mythology of opportunity in America and making it more real. We are different. I happen to have the honor of serving on the board of the Open Education Consortium, which is a global consortium, and these conversations are going on in Australia, Japan, France, Norway, England, Spain, Portugal, Italy. And I know of American institutions that are working, in fact, in refugee camps in Africa with people who have fled religious oppression. So you're going to see it come, but it's so as basic as, if you have a Ministry of Education that is responsible for schools, as opposed to 50 states with 50 approaches to post-secondary education and 25,000 local school boards, that's a very different thing. And so there's really, I think it is more predominant. The book is more about America right now, but I would predict in 10 years, 15 years, you're going to see adaptations of all these things happening in lots of different places.
Well, thank you for writing the book. Thank you for joining us to talk about it. And thank you for joining us on Thursday Thoughts.
Thanks for watching Thursday Thoughts with Dr. Alan Drimmer. This has been a production of University of Maryland University College.